This month, as we continue the story of Disney World's opening in 1971 on Sundays, we're adding in some midweek episodes to explore a range of new offerings at the Florida resort. Today, we're going to focus on Space 220, a new dining experience that is part restaurant and part attraction. It's also a preview of the type of technology that will be used on the Galactic Star Cruiser opening next year. This is, by far, the most difficult dining reservation to acquire right now. So let's jump in and figure out how Space 220 works, what it offers, and if this might be something you should prioritize for your next visit. Space 220, located in the newly named World Discovery neighborhood of Epcot's Old Future World, has been in the process of opening for nearly 2 years. It's a signature restaurant, which means typically that it has one of two emphasis areas. Some of the signature restaurants, like Cinderella's Royal Table, focus more on a themed environment, while others, like Chico, focus more on unique cuisine. The main draw of Space 220 is its elaborate environment, which creates an impressive atmosphere for signature dining. Think of it as the outer space cousin of Be Our Guest, that table service restaurant over in Fantasyland that is elegantly arranged as the Beast's castle, complete with ballroom and windows that present a snowscape. Space 220 has that level of detail, only configured to present an experience of dining in a satellite restaurant that is orbiting just outside of Earth's atmosphere. I'll talk about the food in a minute. The food is good, but this is a restaurant where you will remember the atmosphere more than the meal. As we move through, I also have some audio to place you inside the environment. The experience begins when your group steps into a Stellavator. That is an elevator space large enough to hold about 30 people, presumably positioned on a high-speed track that connects it straight up to the Centauri Space Station restaurant at the edge of space. The name is a callback to the Brava Centauri space station that once inhabited one of Epcot's finest attractions, Horizons. But Centauri is not the only callback to the old Epcot Center. The Stellavator is an updated version of the Hydrolator that, over at the Living Seas Pavilion, once lowered guests down to Sea Base Alpha. The Hydrolator's effects from the mid-1980s were little more than light vibrations and some bubbles rising through water tubes. The new Stellavator presents a far more convincing simulator experience with porthole screens on the top and bottom of the vehicle. As you rise up, presumably from Central Florida, passing through clouds, the movement of the Stellavator matches the experience on the video screens. As the Stellavator passes through light sources, bands of light move through the car. As the Stellavator centers itself through stabilization rings, a triplet set of shock waves passes through the car as well.
You're riding aboard the Mark V Stellavator, the latest in space elevator design and technology. Today, you'll have a spectacular view of Florida and the Eastern Seaboard. Enjoy the ride. I'll be back in a bit with arrival information.
SV2, we're on our final approach.
Roger that. If you look above, you'll see Centauri Space Station coming into view. Once you dock, gather your belongings and exit through the open air lock. A Space 220 agent will be waiting for you.
SV2 cleared for arrival.
Gravity generator active.
Once the Stellavator docks with the satellite restaurant, guests exit into a portal hallway where they pass along rotating tubes of lettuce and other greens, the near twin to the type of experimental greens grown in the lab toward the end of Living with the Land, across the way on the other side of the Old Future World. For those of you who are counting, this adds up to at least 3 ties to other Epcot attractions outside of the current Space Pavilion. In many ways, Space 220 has a surprisingly strong connection to the identity of Epcot Center, the version of Epcot that existed back in the 1980s. It's the type of restaurant that would have fit perfectly in with World of Motion, Universe of Energy, and of course Horizons. It's a place without Disney characters, a restaurant that fits almost perfectly into Epcot's identity from years ago. The main dining area has about 90 tables arranged on 3 tiered levels. At the moment, it seems clear that the restaurant is experiencing some staff shortages. I was there for dinner, but even at that time, despite a standby line to enter, about 20 of those tables off to the sides were dressed for service but remained empty the entire time I was inside. Some of the staff was hired nearly 2 years ago, back when this restaurant was originally scheduled to open. But they weren't brought into work until the end of this past summer when the Patina Group, the company that manages Space 220, started a 4-week training process. The restaurant has been visited by both Bob Iger and Bob Chapek, the 2 highest executives at the Disney company, which is unusual for a new restaurant. But I suspect this is because the technology and artistry employed at Space 220 frame some aspects of the Galactic Star Cruiser, the Star Wars hotel scheduled to open next March. The design and color palette of the restaurant again evoke that early Epcot feel. This is not the type of space travel currently experienced by Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. This is far more in line with the 1980s version of the future as conceptualized in Horizons. Black marble counters accented by thin lines of blue neon, with the lights dimmed low so as to focus your attention on the floor-to-ceiling gallery windows at the end of the restaurant. The Disney team are masters of designing buildings that present architectural illusions. The best-known example of this is the forced perspective of the Disney castles. But throughout the parks, design elements are arranged to subtly manipulate how guests experience and perceive their environments. As you enter the dining area, after rising up presumably hundreds of miles on the Stellavator, you enter the dining room at its highest point, forcing you to look down out the windows at the earth below, which reinforces the illusion of significant height. The restaurant is arranged as a semicircle with 11 windows that open to a presentation of Earth set against a field of stars. The planet itself is a swirl of blue and green along with an iridescent layer of atmosphere. I looked at this for a long time. It's not a projection or a screen. I think it's constructed as a backdrop, like a cyclorama or a painting back illuminated in such a way the light partially bleeds through some of the material. WDI in recent years has become extremely skilled at mixing physical sets with screen elements. This is showcased on Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway and to a lesser extent in Rise of the Resistance. Some of that same blending is on display here as well. In Space 220, the overall space diorama has 3 layers, which gives the visual presentation a stunning amount of depth and believability. A background, a selection of midground elements, and a foreground structure. We've already talked about the background. Think of that as a painting with some light effects and pinhole stars. In the midground between Earth and the restaurant are screens on which appear video elements. These include shuttles, an orbiting lab gliding through space, and astronauts out on a spacewalk. These elements all have depth and definition. And then, in the foreground, is the Space 220 satellite itself. Not only do the viewing windows have a type of thickness associated with a spacecraft, but the satellite extends as a physical structure many feet beyond the glass, presumably out into space. Overall, these 3 layers create a very convincing effect. A word of advice about where you sit. The window booths with their views directly on Earth, I'm guessing, will be the most sought after. Most people generally prefer to be close to the wonders they're watching, but the tables in the middle of the restaurant offer the strongest illusion of existing in space, as the visual layers in the space diorama best combine from that distance to offer a strong illusion of depth. But the environment is only part of the experience. Disney does a fabulous job with its cocktails. They are often flavorful, arranged with interesting colors, and presented with flair. The Astro Spritz cocktail, for example, is a cloud of cotton candy that melts down into a martini glass once Prosecco and juice are added. Both lunch and dinner are arranged as prefixed menus. For $55, lunch includes an appetizer and an entree, and for $79, dinner includes an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert. There's a lot of overlap between the lunch and dinner menus, though dinner does include a few higher-end items, such as an 8-ounce filet and a braised short rib, whereas lunch has flat iron steak and a Centauri burger. Unlike other signature restaurants at Epcot, such as Le Cellier or Maison Paul, the menu is primarily pitched at families, and as such, many of the selections, though good, are familiar. Across Disney World, most table service restaurants arranged for families have some version of steak and mashed potatoes and roast chicken and vegetables. For those who have spent a lot of time at the resort, you'll recognize these as table service staples. Space 220, as a restaurant, experiments far more with the appetizers than with the entrees. I suspect that's a safer option for creativity, especially for families with children. The Starry Calamari, an appetizer with a pepper citrus aioli, is excellent, as is the Blue Moon Cauliflower, which is tempura-crusted cauliflower served with blue cheese crumbles and hot sauce. I should also point out that the restaurant has a lounge area, which is part of the main dining room. The size of the lounge area seems to fluctuate right now from day to day, but it always includes seats at the bar. Through the lounge area, you can go up to Space 220 and simply order a drink or even a Diet Coke and enjoy the atmosphere. But at least for right now, as the restaurant has just opened, seats for the lounge area are offered on a first-come, first-served basis. The line for the lounge opens at 11 a.m. and quickly fills to the point where some people wait hours to experience the restaurant through the lounge area. Lunch and dinner reservations for Space 220 can be made 60 days in advance on the My Disney Experience app or on the Disney World webpage. They fill minutes after they open each day. If you'd like to get a reservation, try this little trick. Have the app open to the dedicated Space 220 page or your computer browser open to the Space 220 webpage before the reservation window opens at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. You'll save time finding reservations directly through the dedicated Space 220 page rather than the main Disney dining link, which will offer you all restaurants in alphabetical order for that day. If you use that main dining link at 6 a.m., you will waste precious seconds scrolling down to the Space 220 option, which might be the difference between finding a table and missing it. The tables really do fill that fast. Oh, one more thing. If you do make the trip up to Space 220, make sure to venture over to the bathrooms, as they're arranged to give you some pre-recorded advice as you use the facilities. Namely, that these toilets up here in space operate the exact same way as those down on Earth.
Your attention, please. These toilets are RC stations operate in the same fashion as those back on Earth. There is no need to modify your laboratory behavior. Thank you.
So who is this restaurant for? Like Be Our Guest over in the Magic Kingdom, Space 220 is part attraction, part restaurant. The effects are impressive and memorable. The drinks are imaginative. The food is good, but not particularly adventurous. It's very much in line with other less expensive table service restaurants. Included in the price tag here is the cost of the experience. Once my meal was over and I was returned back to Epcot, I thought far more about the visual effects than I thought about the food. Because of this, I think that lunch, which is nearly a third less expensive than dinner, is the better of the two options, so long as you don't select the Centauri burger, which then would be the most expensive burger anywhere on property. The experience fully indoors is exactly the same at noon as it is at 7 p.m. I'll be back on Sunday to continue our story about the struggles Disney executives and designers faced when opening Disney World back in 1971. Before I go, one more thing. We're an ad-free, listener-supported podcast. We script out a new show each week, sometimes twice a week. We cover all the costs, including research, hosting, and distribution. This podcast hopefully helps thousands of listeners more deeply connect with the parks and films. That's generally what I'm aiming for, especially with the history episodes, a way for listeners such as you to have a deeper appreciation and a richer experience when you go to the parks or watch films that you already love. Hopefully, some of that has touched your life. This podcast is supported entirely through donations. I know it's been a rough couple of years for everyone, but if you're able, we have a Bandcamp site set up for monthly donations. You can cancel anytime you like. You can join at dhipodcast.bandcamp.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. I'll see you again on Sunday. Until then, this is Todd James Pierce.